lesson for the Standard 7. My name is Teacher Itumeli and I'll be taking you through today's lesson. Today's topic is rates and ratios, but we'll start first with ratios. So one may wonder, what is a ratio? A ratio is a comparison of two or more numbers indicating their size in relation to each other. So it means you compare what? Two or more numbers, looking at their size. So let's go on to my example to elaborate more on the definition of ratios. Let's say you have a triangle which had 4 sides. 3 sides are unshaded and 1 side is shaded. And the question comes and asks, what is the ratio of the shaded part to the unshaded part? Shaded part to unshaded part. So let's look at the shaded part. How many parts are shaded? It's 1. So this will become 1:2. Let's look at the unshaded part. How many triangle parts are unshaded? Let's count them together. This is 1, 2, 3. So this becomes what? 3. So the ratio of the shaded part to the unshaded part is 1:3. So what you have to pay attention is what comes first, shaded part or unshaded part. So another question may come and ask, what is the ratio of the unshaded part to shaded part? These are different questions. The first one says shaded part to unshaded part. The next one is saying unshaded part to shaded part. So let's start with the unshaded part. Let's count the part. Unshaded, 1, 2, 3. So it becomes 3:2. The shaded parts. Let's count the shaded part is 1. So it becomes 3:1. So when you say ratios compare two or more numbers, indicating their size in relation to each other. So this is the relationship between the shaded part and the unshaded part, looking at the sizes. So let's move on to the next question. Another question may say, what is the ratio of the shaded part to the whole shape? So it has changed now. The shaded part to the whole shape. So let's look at the shaded parts. We have 1. So it becomes 1:2 the whole shape. So let's count the triangle part all together. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it becomes 1:4. So that's how simple ratios are. All you have to pay attention is what comes first, shaded part and the whole shape. So normally students will mix. When the question says shaded part to whole shape, you will find some answers like 4:1. This is wrong. So you have to pay attention. You have to focus when doing questions like this. So we'll move on to expressing ratios as fraction. Expressing ratios as fractions. Expressing ratios as fractions. Let's take the ratio that we had from the example I gave you. 1:3. And then the question says express this ratio as a fraction. So what we do is our answer will become 1/3. So the ratio of 1:3 is the same as 1/3. So let's do the following example. The question says express the ratios as fraction and reduce them to their lowest term. When he says reduce them to their lowest term, we mean they should be in such a way that there is no number that can get into both the numbers you are given. So let's take number 1 for example. It says 7 is to 14. So our question says, first thing, express the ratio as a fraction. So what do? 7 is to 14 as a fraction is 7 over 14. And then the next thing is say, and reduce them to their lowest term. They should remain in such a way that there is no number that can get into both these numbers. So we have to find a number that can get into 7 and at the same time that number can get into 14. So what's that number, student? That number is 7. So others are wondering, how did we know the number is 7? So all you have to do is what? Write the multiples of 7 and the multiples of, sorry, the factors, not the multiple. The factors of 7 and the factors of 14. Then you will know how we got this 7. We all did factors from our standard 5. A factor is a number that can get into 7 when you say factors of 7. When you say factors of 14, we mean numbers that can get into 14, the lowest one. So the number that is common to both 7 and 14, we use that number. So let's find the factors of 7. We have 1. 1 can get into 7. Which other number can get into 7? We have 7. 7 can get into 7 one time. Let's move on to 14. What are the factors of 14? The numbers that can get into 14. We have 1. We have 2. We have, which one do we have? Yes, there's also 7. So do you see that there's 7 here and there's 7 here? That's why we decided to use 7. So this one we covered here in standard 5. I hope all of us know how to find factors. So let's move on to our question. So 7 divided by 7, it becomes 1. 14 divided by 7, it becomes, how many 7 are there in 14? 2. So this will become our answer. First thing we did, we expressed the ratio as a fraction and it gave us 7 over 14. And from there, the question says reduce them to their lowest term. So we reduced them. We got 1 over 2. This becomes our final answer. Let's move on to the next question. We have 21 is to 14. So the first thing we have to do, we change it to a fraction and then what do? We reduce it. Let's change 21 is to 14 to a fraction. So it becomes 21 over 14. So always start with the first number. Don't take 14 and say 14 over 21 because you see 21 is larger than 14. No, take the one that starts. So it becomes 21 over 14. So the next step, what do? We reduce them to their lowest term. So we find a number that can get into 21 and at the same time that number can get into 14. So what's that number? That number, like I said, you have to find factors of 21, numbers that can get into 21, factors of 14, numbers that can get into 14, and the common one becomes the one we use here. So let's use 7. So 21 divided by 7 is, it goes in 3 times. 14 divided by 7 will give us 2. So our final answer becomes 3 over 2, which is the same as 3 is to 2. So let's move on to the third one. It says 121 is to 11. So the first thing we do, We change it into a fraction. After changing it into a fraction, what do? We reduce it. So 121 is to 11 as a fraction becomes 121 over 11. Then after changing it into a fraction, we then reduce it. We find a number that can get into 121. At the same time, that number can get into 11. So we divide by, the factor becomes 11. 121 divided by 11. We can use this method. 121 divided by 11. 11 into 12. It goes in once, remainder 1. 11 into 11, that's 1. So it means how many 11s are there in 121? There are 11. So 121 divided by 11 is 11. Then 11 divided by 11 is 1. So our ratio becomes 11 is to 1. Let's move on to the fourth one. 5 is to 40. What do? We change it into a fraction and then we reduce it. It becomes 5 over 40. After this, what do? We reduce it. We find a number that can get into 5 and at the same time that number can get into 40. So that number is 5. Correct? 5 divided by 5 is 1. 40 divided by 5 is, let's count it, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. So it's 8. So our answer becomes 1 over 8, which is the same as 1 is to 8. Let's move on to the last one. The fifth one is 5 is to 15. Let's convert this to a fraction. It becomes 5 over 15. The next step, what do? We reduce it. We find a number that can get into 5 and at the same time that number can get into 15. What's that number? 5. Correct. When we say 5 divided by 5, it gives us 1. 15 divided by 5 is 5, 10, 15 is 3. So our answer becomes 1 over 3. As the ratio is 1 is to 3. Let's move on to the sixth one. A rectangle has a width of 10 centimeters. A rectangle has a width of 10 centimeters and a length of 15 centimeters. So it has a width of 10 centimeters and a length of 15 centimeters. So let's go on to the question. The question says, what is the ratio of the length to width? It says length to width. So what comes first? What comes first is the length. The ratio of the length to width to its lowest term. So first we start with the length. The length to width. So what was the length from our question? The length is 15 centimeters. So it becomes 15 centimeters is to, what is the width? The width of 10 centimeters. So the width becomes 10 centimeters. You are not yet done. The question says to its lowest term. So we find a number that can get into 15 and at the same time that number can get into 10. Remember I said for you to get this number, you have to find factors of 15 and factors of 10. So the factor that is common is the one that we are going to use. So that factor will be 5. 5 can get into 15 and 5 can also get into 10. So we are going to say 5 into 15. 5 10. 5, 10. It goes in 2 times. So our final answer becomes 3:2. So I hope we all understood ratios. Since now we have knowledge about ratios, I would love us to try this exercise. Thank you for coming for our next lesson. See you on my next session.